Hey! Chances are, if you're here, you've already seen the Blackthorn Prod competition I was in. If you haven't, sorry for the mild spoiler in the title, but it was like a week ago, so that's like 10 years in internet time. But it's only 30 minutes in game developer time, so here we are. I wanted to make this video to share a little bit more of my process in making Disinherited for the competition, and then at the end I have an announcement about the future of the game. Anyway, so I got invited to compete against 5 other devs for $10,000. The contest was run over 3 weeks, with 2 devs being eliminated each week. When I got the invite, I didn't even think about it, I just said, hell yeah, I'm in. Which is weird because I really like thinking about things. But then I checked out my fellow competitors on YouTube and I was like, uh-oh. So not only was I the least established person on this roster, but everybody's stuff just looks so good. So the next morning I woke up to the theme, Memento Mori. Memento Mori is a Latin phrase that has a range of translations that go from remember death to remember you will die. It's basically like an old-timey seize the day or remember to leave behind a legacy. I felt like it was really important to connect back to that theme on 3 different levels: mechanics, story, and aesthetic. Mechanically, my mind immediately went to roguelikes. It's a genre where death is pretty much expected, and then I had some other mechanically tied in ideas. Maybe you would leave behind maps, or you would be able to freeze certain areas because you had already seen them. Aesthetically, I wanted to pull from Vanitas still life paintings, which is this sort of iconic style from the 16th and 17th centuries. Basically, they just put a bunch of stuff on the table, usually there's a skull, and the point is to remind you that the pleasures of life and all of our human pursuits are futile, and death is inevitable. Cheery. But also, what a vibe, right? Now, obviously, my skills are not those of a 1600s master painter, but the skulls, the objects, the general vibe, and the sepia color palette informed all of the visuals in the game. Next came story. Looking at all those skulls reminded me of the Paris catacombs, so I thought that might be a pretty cool adventure to explore them in the dark. The first place that I heard Memento Mori was in the Series of Unfortunate Events books, so the character kind of is loosely inspired by a grown-up Klaus. I also mentally named him Samuel for whatever reason, and it just stuck permanently. Also, I wanted the tone to be a little bit scary, and I think the tone is always a little bit scarier when you're controlling a character that's relatively weak, like in Rain World, for example. So the abilities that I gave him weren't really your typical hack and slash hero. He can't move super fast, and his Cane Bash only deals 1 damage. That means all you can do is use enemy projectiles against them, whether by bashing them back or by throwing and catching. Game design wise, I think there's an inherent tension here that helps produce the fun. Anytime you want to deal damage, you have to put yourself at risk of taking it. The other main mechanic is the light. I decided to have the light burn down gradually and shrink, which functions as a timer without there being a timer. To encourage you to fight the enemies instead of just running past, they drop lantern oil, which keeps your light up. But there's another layer. Having your light lower means your visibility is lower, which means you have less time to react to incoming projectiles. It also makes it harder to explore, making it more likely that you'll fall on spikes or not be able to figure out the way forward. Then I added the Reaper. He can move through walls and obviously deals damage when he touches you. That makes for a good timer as well, but it also needs to interact with the other mechanics. So I made it so that you can stun him by throwing a bone at him, and also that when he gets close to you, he sucks away your light faster. Also, the breathing. After some tuning, the mechanics felt like a nice, tight, interlocked system, and something I hadn't quite seen before. Even without much in the way of art, it was starting to really feel like a game. So now I had to zoom out and get to the macro. What is the goal of this game? It seemed like the natural antagonist here was Death himself. So then the idea came, what if the goal is the opposite of Memento Mori, to get eternal life by killing Death? I didn't have a lot of time, but I got together a miniature boss fight. I drew this boss arena, and I thought it would be cool to have this moment where you grab Death's heart and throw it at him, and that's what makes him vulnerable to being killed. The fight itself is super basic. I mean, Death just kind of goes back and forth, and you have to hide in the little crannies and throw bones at him. Not quite at the level of combat depth I'm used to designing for Lighthoof, but it gets the job done, and it's actually trickier than I thought it would be. I then did a very special hand-drawn animation for the ending, which I don't want to show here because it's a huge spoiler, but it is really cool and it took me an entire day. So let's talk about animation for a sec. After spending hours on Samuel's frame-by-frame animations, which are themselves pretty minimalistic already, I knew I was going to be in big trouble if I had to do a bunch of enemies this way. Plus, when I was trying to draw the Reaper, I ran into this problem where doing the same clean lines and flat shading as Samuel made him not that intimidating. I started roughening him up a bit though, and that's where things started to get interesting. As I've mentioned before in the art styles video, I have never done 2D bone animation. A lot of that's because I don't really love how the movement looks, if I'm being honest. But it does solve two problems at once. First, you can draw more detailed sprites and get them moving, and second, you can do it quite a bit faster. So there's a bit of a visual difference between Samuel and the enemies, but I actually think that's okay. They come from completely different worlds, after all. And then the last touch was the music. I'd been thinking about it all week, like listening to Catacombs from pictures at an exhibition. I knew I wanted something pretty atmospheric and dark and oppressive. Finally, I was out walking my dogs, and I had this thought of this, "Come in," but it's really low, like it's been slowed down. And that ended up making the foundation for the music. I had just enough time to get some of my friends and my brother to playtest, and they discovered some bugs and some unintentional speedrunning strats. On Sunday at 3 a.m., I sent in my build and straight up crashed. I was definitely proud of what I'd managed to make. It was simple, it was small, but it was also mechanically tight, it told a complete story, and it was a little challenging too. In the morning, we got to play the other contestants' builds. And I really wasn't sure what was going to happen. Every contestant had made something completely different, and the entries were so strong. My only goal at this point was to get to round 2 so I could develop further, and I really wasn't sure that that was going to happen. Luckily, they did like it enough to let it pass on.
But actually I had the most fun with that game. I read those cool platforming, I liked how you can grab the bones, throw them, the whole thing of the lights, you know, and the creeping death and stuff, really cool character design.
But I still had very little hope that I was going to make the finals. Kodir, Buki, and Lixian are all big deals, and they're experienced as devs and video producers. The idea of beating 2 of them felt pretty unrealistic. So I threw myself at it twice as hard. This was the week where I added wall climb, stamina, figured out procedural generation for the maps, and added a new boss. Buki gave me the midweek twist of computer, which was quite the curveball. But I got inspired by Ada Lovelace, the 19th century mathematician sometimes called the first computer programmer. So the new boss was Augusta. Her area is called the Infinite Machine. She's an Ada Lovelace level visionary whose work was stolen and buried by her colleagues. Seeking immortality to realize her vision, she came down to Death's domain and found it. I also changed the stats system to be modular, which is something I've never done before and was pretty proud of how it came out. This let me create items that could modify stats and enhance Samuel's abilities. The common items, which gave you small stat upgrades, would be prayer beads, but then there were the larger items called relics, which might spawn in the exploration areas, but were more likely to be bought in the shops. I made this new character, Old Red Eye, who teaches you all the skills that you need in the tutorial and also runs the shop. He's kinda sassy and mostly just hopes to profit off of you, and he also gets to be the mouthpiece for the lore, at least right now. As you can imagine from all the things I just listed, stuff got pretty intense this week. The belief that this was my last chance pushed me beyond my limits, and not in like a cool anime way. I was loving the work, but the pressure that I was feeling was nearly unbearable. After turning in my build and my video, I crashed again. I had barely gotten any chance to playtest with anyone this time. I was sure they were going to find a ton of bugs, and I was just feeling really bad about my work, and I was sure I was going to be eliminated. So imagine my surprise when I was the first person to pass on to the next round. Actually, you don't have to imagine, because they caught it on video. Thank you. And then there was the part where Lemon said this.
It was difficult to really point out any one part of the game that fell flat enough to criticize it too harshly.
Lemon's Patch Quest devlogs were a huge inspiration to me when I was first getting into game dev, so hearing him say that is something I'm basically gonna remember forever? Yeah, really carried me through the final week. I got 2 bosses done. Silas the Dolorous is a monk who worships pain, the idea being that pain seems to extend time, so suffering might lead to eternal life. His followers hit themselves in the head with planks and throw them at you. Then I had the theme that I had given Buki thrown back at me. Piracy. I made Eudor the Imperious, a pirate who obtained eternal life by plundering a relic. But he and his crew were sucked into a maelstrom. The hardest part of this boss was getting the camera to work right. I then gave all the bosses their own special relics, and got to work adding a couple other systems. I felt like the exploration phase was giving a nice sense of flow, as you wander around collecting beads, avoiding enemies, and beating the timer. But you really had no choice about what you were offered. So a strategic build was almost impossible to create. So I made this bead trader that lets you trade in 2 of your prayer beads and then duplicates one of yours. This sounds pretty simple, but in between drawing him, rigging him up, and dealing with all of this UI hell, it took well over 12 hours. Then I made this memento system, which lets you choose between 3 of the items you had on your last run each time you reincarnate. I had big dreams of creating this animated opening sequence where you get read the will and then decide to go into the catacombs, but that was way out of scope. It was basically all I could do to just draw this new title screen, because I wanted to reveal the new title I had given it along with the framing plot. Literally in the final hour, I gave Mr. Grimm a new attack, this slash. In the final judges meeting, they revealed that in addition to the 5 judge votes, they had given the games over to the community to have a vote, and that would count for 2 votes. The voting was really close on the panel, but the community voted 70-30 against me, which swung the overall vote. Initially, this did make me sad, but not because I wanted to win really badly. From the very start, I said to myself and others, if I get to the second round, that's a win. If I get to the finals, that's like a super ultra mind-blowing win. But I will not be winning this competition. My only goal was to make a cool game that I would be proud of, and that would represent me, and that people who resonated with it would be interested in my work going forward. The 70-30 vote made me worry that people wouldn't really like Disinherited when the video came out, and that it wasn't as good as I hoped it was, but wow. If you're watching this, chances are you are one of the people who has proved that worry very, very wrong. Not only did my YouTube audience double in days, but my baby Discord has grown and gotten more active, and there have been a wild amount of wishlists on Disinherited in the past couple days. That is every dev's dream. Now, on to the bright future of Disinherited. Your support has made me so excited to finish. And I realized that the smartest idea might be to just capitalize on this instant momentum and fix a few things, add a few things, and just hit publish, and that would probably end up with a pretty decent gaming experience. But I want it to be a really good gaming experience, and potentially even a great one. So here's the challenge. My own challenge to me. I'm giving myself 100 days to complete Disinherited. Each week, I will release a devlog with my work from the previous week. It's gonna be intense, but as we've already seen, deadlines keep me urgent and efficient. Plus, my wonderful husband has volunteered to help in 2 ways. First, he's going to be editing these videos for me. Second, he'll be acting as the game's producer, keeping me organized and prioritized. It really cannot be overstated how good he is at that. We've scoped the project so that at the end of 100 days, there will be a game that offers a complete, polished, interesting, and highly replayable experience. But then I want to launch a Kickstarter. See, I have a bunch of ideas that extend beyond that 100-day scope. More areas, more bosses, more playable characters, more systems, and more story. Additionally, I'd love to hire voice actors and instrumentalists, and if things get really crazy, maybe an animation studio to do a little opening cinematic or even a trailer. I have no idea how much that kind of thing costs. And then there's stuff like porting to console or localization to other languages. The release date that I have in mind is late February of 2025. That puts us outside the fall release rush, the January slump, and lets me do my very first Steam Next Fest in February for that last burst of momentum before release. Thank you for being here at the starting line with me. We have a really long way to go, but it's gonna be fun. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.